This is sketchy, but at least it's working. I'm pretty sure I'm qualified to deliver a baby now. Alright guys, guess what? The E63 is back on the lift. So I finally got everything fixed, I thought. I took it for a drive, did a race start, nice loud thud from the driver's side motor mount. So this thing needs motor mounts. I kind of suspected that, especially from being the dealer I bought it from. But anyway, so we're going to do motor mounts. Here's the problem with motor mounts on a W212 E63. If you do it by the book, you either need to drop the entire motor out or you need to drop the entire subframe suspension out. Both of those require a vast amount of work, and both of those you probably can't do in a driveway. So this video is gonna be a little different. I'm not doing it exotic car DIY style where I do everything by the book. This is gonna be a sketchy, shady tree mechanic style video. Can you get the motor mounts done in a W212 E63 4MATIC without having to do all that work? So stay tuned, we're gonna find out here in a little bit. All right, so just a real quick recap. So we do need to take both downpipes off. They all come off in one assembly to the motor over there. But if you look up here, you can see the engine mount right there. Right there at the top where my shadow is a bolt, and then there are two on the side. So we need to get to that bolt. On the other side, let's see, on the driver's side, a bit more hidden, but right there, just above the blue is where the bolt is. As you can see, there's a heat shield over it. So we're just gonna start taking stuff off and see how far we can get. We're going to use 13 millimeters to undo the downpipe. Everything has been soaking in WD-40 for a couple hours. Hopefully that'll give us access to the O2 sensors now. Looks like to get the downpipes off, you kind of remove that brace. And to remove that brace, you got to take off the under sound deadening stuff. Alright, so the goal here is to unplug the O2 sensors. Now we can get our hand up in there. So up here you see the two O2 sensor connectors and their little holders on the floor. I'll just kind of show you how they come off. The one on the left up there, you have to find this little button and push it down and just pull it and it comes out. The other one was a little bit more tricky. Not sure why they designed this very elaborate plug. The one on the right, the push plug is on the top at the very, very back, kind of at the very top of that connector on the back side. You have to push that and then pull out. Now with that downpipe off, we can actually see inside the bridge pipe, kind of a pretty narrow pipe there, onto the left side. So again, I'm using two 8-inch extensions. One has a slight swivel head to it. And these are coming off pretty easy with the WD-40. This is where that swivel head comes in handy. You can get just a little bit of swivel. To be honest, this is one of the most frustrating things I've done in a job, because you got all these razor sharp things and it's tied up everywhere. You have to jam, you have to lower the exhaust, kind of find a way to hang it. I got it hanging with zip ties right now. And then you got to reach up here, and the button is in like the worst spot. You have to be able to pull and push the button all at the same time too. I really have no clue why Mercedes would make them so difficult. I thought maybe leaving them in the brackets would help, but no, they can't. The side you got to unplug is also anchored in the bracket. So whatever, that's just the way it is. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, so after our battle with the O2 sensors, we now have both of them removed. So you can see it appears that our engine mount has been leaking and oozing all kinds of wonderful stuff. So that bolt you see up front is the bolt we need to undo. There's one on the other side, and then there is a cap. I don't know if you guys can see it. That black cap right above the drip, that uncovers the other bolt to get it undone. And then the third bolt coming through the wheel well here, there's the top of the bolt kind of right there. We're gonna get the frontmost bolts from the wheel well, and then everything else. And so then the plan is we're going to jack up the motor a few inches and lower the subframe a few inches, and that should hopefully allow us to clear the engine mount past the exhaust and the subframe, because this hole right now is just a little bit too tiny. It does appear we have several tools to be able to use at our disposal. I'm just using a 13mm gear wrench. That was surprisingly easy. Okay, so one bolt out. Well, I can touch it with my fingers. but not without bending this heat shield. I'm going to be able to get it from this angle. So I do have one other idea. All right, so bending that heat shield is a viable idea. However, I don't really want to do that. My idea is we can get that very easily once the motor's jacked up. The motor can't be jacked up until this bolt is undone. So let's see if we can do this guy now. Looks like I'm probably going to need a swivel. So we're going to use a E14 to get this bolt off. Fits in there nicely with kind of a swivel socket, and then I have a jack on the motor that I'm going to lift at the motor just slightly, as you can see, just enough to take some load off of that bolt as we unscrew it. So one note, that is a very, very tight bolt. My friend said you can kind of tap on it and maybe it'll loosen it up a little bit. I broke a 3/8 inch swivel extension, but I was able to get the socket directly to a 1/2 inch breaker bar. And then what I did is I put a piece of wood between the transmission and here just so it didn't squish. Right below this shield is your starter, and I just didn't want it as you try to rotate this to squish on your starter. But anyway, as you can see now, the breaker bar is able to turn the bolt. Yeah, this is a pretty tight bolt, so make sure you start off with a 1/2 inch, work your way down to the 3/8. Out she comes, finally. All right, so now we're on the passenger side, again a 13 millimeter. Looks like you can easily get a socket on these. Surprisingly, these are not very tight. Pull off the little bolt cap. There it goes. All right, straight to the 1/2 inch. Again, we're using a E14 socket. All right, so now you can see this kind of set up right here. So we're gonna see, don't have a whole lot of room. Oh yeah, that one actually moved first try. Anyway, to recap, we broke it loose with a 1/2 inch. I think ideally you're probably going to want to get a 3/8 or a 1/2 inch swivel impact socket and attach it straight to the E14 socket and break it with a breaker bar. Once you get it loose, then you can get just your 3/8 ratchet and kind of ratchet it out like I'm doing now. Alright guys, so according to the manual, now you're supposed to jack up the motor and also lower the subframe in order to get these mounts out. So the things it says to watch out for is obviously you need to make sure you're not squishing any harnesses or vacuum lines anywhere, so we got to check that. And it also says we might have to loosen the transmission mount as well. So all three things we're going to do. Alright, so now you can see we've got a pretty good gap there. Definitely not enough to get that motor mount out, so we need to get this to come lower. So this is the part where some things say you need to take this all the way off, and we're going to see how far we can get without getting it off. To get it loose, it looks like we're going to have to undo this little bracket here, and then if we look up here, one bolt right there behind the plastic, then up here at the front there's another bolt. Up front there's these little brackets that go to the oil cooler and heat exchanger. Got to undo their little clamp, both sides. What I'm simply doing is backing them all the way out and then screwing them back in just a little bit. Alright, so now all the bolts, all 4 of the bolts are loosened but threaded in at least 4 turns, so it'll still support weight. And now back up here in the wheel, remember we still have the front bolts to do. And if you remember before, there was almost no gap here. Now there is a pretty good 1-inch gap. So hopefully we'll be able to get to that motor mount bolt easily now. Well, it looks tight. It's enough room to get the gear wrench in here and undo that 13 millimeter. All right, so now that we got the front bolt undone, here's our first try at trying to get this guy out. Let's see, is it even possible? Well, it moves. It's loose. All right, we are close, but I think the answer is no. I think if we take the steering column out, which is just 2 bolts, I think we'll be able to get it out. Just 1 bolt. That's kind of cool. Didn't know it did that. Well, can we get it out? Oh yeah, it's out. All right, that thing. Huh. It is actually like destroyed on the inside, like all the rubber's bad. So yes, this was a very bad mount. Now, might as well, since we're here, go ahead and throw the new mount in there. So here we go. The new mount is a bit taller because it's, well, not collapsed like the other one. With much struggling, I was able to get that into place. So the issue that I'm running into on this side, I don't know if you guys can see it, there's an axle shaft right there. That axle shaft actually hits the top of the cross frame when you're jacking up the motor, because remember, the axle shaft is actually attached to the motor. It goes through a hole, this hole to be exact, and when you jack it up, it hits the top of the hole. So literally, that's as far as you're able to jack it, you know, without actually pulling out the axle shaft. So on this side, you're able to do it. It is very snug, but you are able to get the motor mount in and out with the axle shaft still in place. I kind of have a feeling that it's going to be a little different story for the passenger side, but maybe if you're just working on the driver, that might just be enough. All right, so up here in the front passenger wheel well, we can now get to that bolt right here. The only thing I did to this side is I moved the sensor, just kind of the headlight sensor out of the way from those two bolts. So anyway, undo this, and then we're going to struggle to get this guy out. So now it'll just come out, right? No, probably not. All right, now to evaluate our choices. So basically, I've already kind of looked. The axle shaft is touching the top here. So what I'm saying is the subframe will not go any lower, and the engine will not go any higher than that. And we do not have enough room to get it out. So I think that's going to make us go to plan B. And plan B is to remove this axle shaft. To remove this axle shaft, we need to kind of disassemble the front suspension a little bit, almost like we were lowering this. So that's the next step. So to get the axle shaft off, we need to loosen the strut bolt. Literally, we can just let this sag down. Actually, before we let it hang down, just like I had to do when you pull this off to lower it, make sure your ABS lines have enough slack. So it looks like we're gonna have to disconnect them from up here. All right, I think that should be enough. Let's see. There we go. There. All right, so now you should be able to use like a pry bar of some form to be able to pop that axle shaft out. It's just held in kind of a spring clip internally. Nice, so it's out. All right, so let me show you what I did. I tried every tool I had to get up in there and pry that guy out. Couldn't find anything. So what I did is I actually took this metal beam, the one that we removed from right there, and this thing just worked perfectly, popped it out in like 2 seconds. So you don't even have to buy a tool. The car gives you the tools you need. All right, so now our axle shaft is now sliding out of the housing. So now I'm going to go and jack up the motor, but making sure that nothing is binding anywhere. All right, so we are definitely higher than we were before, and we also should be able to pull the subframe down a lot more than we were before. So let's see. So we actually might be hitting the end of the bolt. So here's the plan, guys. So we need to drop that subframe down, but you never want to remove the bolts completely, because if you remove the bolts completely, there's a chance that that several hundred-pound subframe could fall on you. So over here, I have literally old control arm bolts from Mercedes control arms, and they're very long. They're maybe 6 inches long, while the ones in the car are only like 3 and 4 inches long. So we remove the short bolt from the car, install one of these, and that allows you to lower the subframe without unbolting it, if that makes sense. So it'll be hanging on these very, very strong bolts and never be completely unbolted. One thing you need to do to lower the subframe more, there's this giant thick cable, goes to your steering. You need to pop it out here, here, and then all along here, and that will give you plenty of slack to lower this down 4 inches or so. So like I said, we never want to have the subframe completely unsupported. So what we're going to do with all other bolts attached, it is safe to take out one, the other 3 are holding it. Then we're just going to take a larger bolt from a control arm, or you can even use the rear bolts, you know, you might have to adjust it, thread it in there. Make sure you got like an inch of bite so it's nice and strong. But now what you do is the subframe can't ever fall more than that far, if that makes sense. So anyway, that's what we're going to do to make sure that it is safe, fully supported, yet 3 or 4 inches lower. All right, guys, so I told you this video would be raw. So what I've done is now completely unhooked these two things, made sure I had plenty of slack. So now this is just hanging on the weight of the bushings. The axle shaft has completely come out, and that has allowed us to come down even further. Passenger side, I've done the exact same thing. So the axle on this one comes out a little bit differently. You see how that's splined in there? I simply just kind of got a rubber mallet and start tapping on it, and it's coming out at the splines. So that's the plan with this one, to get this axle shaft out, and then we're going to allow the subframe to drop even lower. It's still just not quite there to come out. So I got to move a couple more things around. I'll show you how I get it here in just a few minutes. All right, so now we have both axle shafts out, which should allow us a lot more movement. I'm going to go up a little bit higher here. All right, I think we're topped out on the motor. As you can see, I'm actually at the bottom of the bolt here. It's pretty far, but yeah, man, that is not going to come out unless this subframe comes all the way down. Man, you know what? If the alternator was out, I probably could shove it right through where the alternator hole is. So here's where we are. Both axles are undone. Everything's hanging. I've installed longer bolts just that I had from old control arms from Mercedes and stuff like that. So the subframe is being held up by 2 bolts on that side and 2 bolts on this side. Now I'm over here at the front of the motor, and I kind of think I discovered something. Now that this thing is hanging, you can actually go forward with this. Let's see if we got enough room to go all the way forward. All right, let's get his pointy side facing out this hole. We are kind of stuck against the alternator. Now we've got him underneath the motor. Okay, looky there. I'm pretty sure I'm qualified to deliver a baby now. Ta-da! Holy crap! Alright, so now we got our new mount. I put a skim coat of oil on him, believe it or not, because we need some lube. He could go all the way. Well, we're upside down in the general area. Probably the worst 2 minutes of YouTube, huh? All right, so he's successfully in the right location, completely upside down. I don't know if we can move him around. Hopefully, we'll do it. It'll work. Keep the faith. Subframe in. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, look where he is. So we need to start getting the subframe back up. And then before you get your subframe completely tucked back up, it's a good idea to get this front bolt, since it's really, really hard to get otherwise. Told you this be Shady Tree mechanic style. Double wrenching it. There we go. Perfect. Well, there you go, guys. So now we have 2 brand new motor mounts installed on the E63 without lowering the motor and without completely removing the subframe. So we did that by lowering down the subframe on those long control arm bolts that I showed you earlier. And to get it low enough, you do have to remove the axle shaft. So if you're just doing this side, you don't have to remove the axles. You can just drop it down 1 inch, remove the steering, and it comes at the back. If you're going to do both, which you probably should, you do need to remove both axle shafts, which will make that side very easy. And then you need to lower it to the about 3 inches down, and it comes out the front, interesting enough. So anyway, let's go ahead and get this all bolted back up so we can get this thing actually back on the road again. All right, so now we can tighten down the bolt. So these motor mounted subframe bolts get 28 Newton meters, which surprisingly is not very tight. Luckily, I've spent years of my life training to know what 28 Newton meters feels like with a gear wrench. Just kidding, not a total barbarian. All right, 28 Newton meters. There we go. So now we need to install our M12 mount to engine bolts. All right, well, they actually slid very far in there on their own. And we're using E14 on the swivel. Yes. Very good. So the torque on this bolt is 80 Newton meters. So what I did is actually just got back from AutoZone, bought some impact universal joints. So hopefully that'll allow me to tighten these to spec without breaking anything. So first, let's just get it snug. All right, so we got the Craftsman torque wrench. I don't like to put a side load on there, so we got this wood block. Oh yeah, torqued. I have a feeling this might be the trickiest part. Who knows? No, I don't think anything can be worse than those O2 sensors. All right, now we're gonna do the driver's side, see if we can wiggle this guy in there without it dropping. I don't know if my new swivel is gonna fit in there. Uh-oh. Let's go ahead and get this torque down. Beautiful. Love it. Now I'm so pumped. Motor mounts are done. All right, so I got the motor mounts here. That is the left side. I already took off this one. This is the right side. Oof, they are, I don't know if you can see inside there. They're kind of already all torn up. This one's still pretty firm. This one, on the other hand, completely shot. That's why I was making so much noise, leaking all over the place. This thing is done. That sucks. That's 46,000 miles. All right, the book says 180 Newton meters on these, so let's give it a shot. That is a lot. 3, 4. All right, so for reassembly of the axles, there's just a snap ring that we have to push it past. I have a tiny bit grease here that I'm just going to kind of lube the threads just so they don't get all rusty over time or anything like that, and so it slides on there nicely, obviously. So right on the end of the male side, you can see there is a little snap ring and there's a little groove on the inside here, so all we got to do is push it in enough that it clicks on that groove. All right, so now we're just going to push really firmly to try to get past that snap ring. It kind of needs a good, just one good punch and it'll go, but I really don't want to hammer on it. There it goes. Boom. So that was 2 hands on the side pushing at full strength, and it went in. Heard it pop. All right, so now we're over here at the passenger side, and you really need to make sure that you didn't get any dirt on the axle shaft and that you didn't scratch up your seal at all. So right now I'm just kind of making sure everything is clean. So one other thing we can do while we're here, this is the only way to actually fill the front differential. There is no fill hole on it. It all goes through the axle shaft. So we can actually make sure that A, we're full, or we could do a fluid change here. I kind of decided while I was in here to go, you know what, I already got the front axle shaft out. That was kind of a pain. Might as well do the front fluid while we're here. So front fluid oil change on a E63, 6mm. Undo this guy. All right, go and unscrew it. I got a 1 quart container here. Hopefully it's not more than 1 quart. We'll see. Here goes the washer. Nice at the very bottom of this. It does not appear like there is a whole lot of fluid in here. I'm measuring, how big is this? Looks like 12 ounces have come out, dribbling out now. So not very much. I didn't really see the capacity. Now it's supposed to take 7W, what was it, 90? I just looked it up a few minutes ago. I think the code is 239.72 Mercedes spec oil. So luckily I got some of that. All right, so drain for a few minutes and then replace. So now just to make sure I at least have what I poured out, I dumped that one into a dirty one, and I got the clean one here, and I'm just gonna go ahead and fill it up with some brand new stuff. And we're gonna at least make sure we get the same amount that came out, just because this one's not really the fill until it spills kind of style. Let's see if we can get that tube up in there. All right, here we go. My only concern is just maybe not overfilling it, and turns out that it's supposed to take 0.55 liters, which turns out it's about 19 ounces. So we're going to go ahead and put 19 ounces in here. All right, so with everything topped off, we can gently reinsert this into the hole. All right, so I've lifted the spindle back into place. Go ahead and insert this all the way. Gonna kind of visually check the seal before it goes the rest of the way in. And then I kind of have a feeling we're gonna struggle like we did on the other side. Full strength push to get this guy to click in. Actually felt a grab on that one. All right, it's in. I didn't think this part would be sketchy. Anyway, let me tell you how I did that. So at first, I'm trying to just push full strength. I guarantee I'm pushing with 150 pounds of force, and it's just not going in there. And because it slides into a shaft, but then it gets up to the snap ring and just kind of gets stuck, and it won't go past there. So what I did is I jacked up the whole thing just with the jack underneath here, so the angle is at least straight. So I'm not trying to push in a CV that's diagonal, it's straight. So then what I did is when it's in that shaft, I back it out and then push it really fast. So I might only be getting like 70 pounds of force because I'm kind of trying to do it fast, but that kinetic energy made it just snap into there. So anyway, I guess that's how you do it. That's how my friend at the dealership says how he does it. I was like, do you guys have a tool that does this? And he's like, no. He goes, we just kind of ram it in there. So that's how it's done, guys.